So it's my great pleasure to introduce Dr. Eftia Michalakis, who is Chair and Assistant Professor in the Department of Classical and Modern Languages and affiliated to the Gender and Women's Studies programme at Brandon University. She specialises in comparative literature, critical theory, medical humanities and feminist theory. She's co-director of the Medical Humanities Research Group, and she published a monograph in 2017, The Question of Virginity, in which she shows how the hymen has been historically contested as a biological sign. And I think she's coming to tell us today about her new work in that direction, and it sounds really exciting. So I'll hand the floor over to you. Thank you.
Thank you. It's very strange to not wear a mask. I'm so thankful to be here today. I want to thank, obviously, Egenis for having me. I want to thank everyone involved in preparing the event today. It's very appreciated. So I wanted to begin my talk today. It should be approximately 45 minutes. And then, of course, I welcome any questions, insights, comments that you may have. And we'll see how things go. So in 2017, my book, The Question of Virginity, or in French, La Virginité en Question, was published at the University of Montreal Press. While I was preparing it, writing it, and even after it was published, the specter of the word Parthenos, was still lurking in the back of my mind. Oftentimes, it was never a voice of reason that was there. At other moments, it seemed strangely familiar. I thought that continuing to pay attention to this word concept would serve no purpose beyond the first book. My research had led me to work with this ancient Greek word, Parthenos. This foreign word for the contemporary reader means young girl, young boy, virgin, but also ageless and genderless, and eternally childish. The word is also used in the context of marriage, meaning a marriageable daughter. It does not necessarily refer to virginity as you would understand it today. We are talking mostly, for instance, in the Hippocratic treatises of ancient Greece up until approximately the 17th century, of the mouth of the womb, the mouth of the womb. Moreover, Parthenos is as much mortal as they are divine. For instance, Athena and Artemis are Parthenae, Antigone and Electra are Parthenae, and the Furies are Parthenae. They are all, in their multiple identities Parthenae, but they are not necessarily virgins. Julia, so what was interesting to me in my first book was that there was this cohabitation between immanent law, meaning of this mortal world, immanent, and divine law, right? Of the sacred and the profane world. This word, Parthenos, therefore, was calling me to an entirely different semantic and semiotic network of signs, aesthetics, politics, obviously. And yet, even after I thought that I had understood it, it still kept jabbing at me. Julia Cissa's words, in my opinion, summarize the main aim of this strange concept word by saying it is not possible to translate Parthenos by virgin. It would be necessary to conclude then from this statement that a Parthenos is not a virgin. The meaning of the word Parthenos is moreover impossible to translate, especially if its possibility of designating a girl having had sexual relations, but being childless, becomes the decisive criterion for its definition. So let me explain that. In Hippocratic medicine, since the hymen was only invented later on in the 17th, well, it appeared for the first time in the 15th century, but only became a valid signifier for determining virginity, probably towards the end of humoral medicine in the mid-18th century. So up until that point, but specifically in ancient Greece, the only way one could analyze or assess or test virginity was if a woman was pregnant. That was the only way. So thus, by this reinscription in my work of the word Parthenos, a word which engages and calls this aporia of translation, this aporia of interpretation, a double bind, one thing and its opposite, a virgin and yet not a virgin. I wanted to show the dynamic limits of language to open another path of interpretation to the contemporary reader. As Jean-Claude Villemin has written, it is not because we are irremediably in history that we are prohibited from experimenting with new ways of being and doing by working not with the present, which would refer to epistemic isomorphism, but to actuality, which suggests a questioning of the present state of things, making it possible to influence the ordinary course of history. So this reworking consists of bringing the words of a language across what seems to be like a no man's land, as it were, possibly for the contemporary reader, for the reader's mind and body, into that of another world and another body. This traveling, this reworking, cannot be accomplished without this reader, I, having the necessary background knowledge and some notion about what the original text is trying to say. But this background is maybe an impossible translation machine. This other book is there. It's not yet written, but it is there. It exists. I am no longer a virgin of this first book. And yet, this reworking belongs to a type of machine that is not a conveyor belt of infinitely identical lines and circles. It is not a process of substitution. Ancient Greek, modern Greek, French, and English have different structures, different ways of integrating words into sentences, and therefore different ways of being in the world. Whereas English and French usually depend upon word order and less upon changing the shapes and sounds of words, such alterations or inflections are the rule in Greek and enable the order of the words itself or themselves to convey far more nuanced meanings than the basic order of subject, verb, object. I deflowered you, you deflowered me. In Sophocles' Antigone, for instance, the playwright places the adverb eti, eti, of line 3 in such a position as to modify either the verb in I cite, Zeus is yet to fulfill, or the participle in I cite, for us to yet living, to TWO, thus gaining two meanings from the single adverb. In reworking this concept, I would like to refuse to choose between one and the other. I want to take the limit beyond the binary sign meaning paradigm. To the extent that meaning is lost for the contemporary reader of ancient texts because distortion and anachronism are introduced, this reader, I, gives this disclaimer. I openly admit that I am in fault and that this is a mistranslation, the inevitable sacrifice of the bad virgin and virgin, me, for the sublime goal of stalking the death of the concept, Parthenos. Much like Foucault's archaeological method meant to uncover alternative and disturbed histories of systems of knowledge by a process of unstructuring of knowledge and the categories in which to describe its historical experience, I too seek to discard teleological efforts of reassigning systematic frameworks. Instead, however, beyond and within Foucault, I sit uncomfortably with the knowing that there are always epistemological mutations that are not yet complete. My desire for unearthing Parthenos from beyond the grave and for pasting its broken semiotic pieces back together can be felt as a type of archaeological mourning, an effective anachronism, an impossible resuturing, which may have more to do with the medical humanities than one might initially have anticipated. The use of the word concept Parthenos instead of virgin here to denote a body or genre or corpus of thought of the thing that has so many names as an umbrella term coordinates or demarcates a distinctive collection of species. And this is itself particularly problematic. This inherent ambivalence inhabits a vector of change. As infinitesimal as this change may be, one word is always indebted to another, to the enabling obstacle that is organized dead matter in the making. With all its ambivalent nature, the word of the past somehow beckons what is to come and pass, is structured to prepare for its own annihilation and possible mutation. And the word of the present carries this mourning, this internalization within its hidden history, its microscopic genetic formulae. For Elizabeth Grosz, this resembles a type of Darwinian dynamism or dynamism. Dynamism? Okay. It's because of the French. Dynamism. So, Y is strange, a strange vowel. Okay, so this resembles a type of Darwinian dynamism, which is, and I cite, is the condition of not only cultural existence, but also cultural resistance. That is the basic concern of which is the process of change, of becoming other. If this modern day issue surely concerns for Grosz molecular biologists who may work with ethological simulations, or those working in the arena of artificial life or intelligent life or artificial intelligence, as well as medical engineers, the modern day Victor Frankensteins, who play with open-ended computer programs, it may as well concern, may possibly be the chief concern, also of medical humanists, and why not also literary theorists like myself. In Becoming Undone, Darwinian Reflections of Life, Politics, and Art, Grosz asks a series of questions, some of which are, out of what raw materials and using what processes did the simplest forms of life emerge? Can there be a silicone-based, carbon-based, or say nitrogen-based life form? Is life a likely consequence of chemical potential? Taking Grosz's questions out of her context and into mine, and slightly modulating them, mildly preparing the questions for another propagation, an anti-growth possible elaboration or an anti-adaptation, an anti-specialization of her language, where words and things are no longer organized in increasingly binary categories of what matters only here and now, only for the real, only for the present. This type of reading that I'm trying to find has allowed me to be touched by the surprising, a type of antimatter drenched in a mucus that has diluted the blood of my veins. Darwin's own writing on natural and sexual selection, writes Elizabeth Grosz, is based on attempting to understand evolution as the emergence in time of biological innovation and surprise. End of quotation. Anchoring his approach in a linguistic perspective, and this is a shift in my talk, Jacques Derrida, probably did not expect that, tells us in his double session published in 1971, just 2 years after Foucault's Archaeology of Knowledge, that, and I cite, the link of interest is this corner between literature and truth. The link of interest in this corner between literature and truth. There are indeed many words which do this work of linkage. Some for him are destinérance, so the destiny of erring, E-R-R-I-N-G, to make mistakes. But also from French, the word is errance, so essentially to travel without destination, right? So what is the destiny of traveling without destination? Whilst erring. But also hauntology, H-A-U-N-T-O-L-O-G-Y, so the science of being haunted. So this linkage is this destination, this voyage, this traveling without knowing where you're going. Obviously, the element of surprise is always there, so at least the desire, the dream is there. So there are indeed many words in Derrida's oeuvre that try to think about this linkage, this link between literature and truth, going through those destinations, past coming, future unknowing. But the one I would like to focus on today is that of hymen. Although one might say, justly so probably, but all serve to illustrate a break in the apparent unitary fullness of meeting a strange destination, to which this destination is doomed, or at least meaning is doomed for this destination. More precisely, in the double session, so which is a chapter in dissemination, the motive of hymen is taken by Derrida from Mallarmé's work. Mallarmé, who talks about le blanc, the white space, or the fold, or the feather, or the hymen, etc. So Mallarmé also uses the hymen to think about the white space, the unknowable, or the unknown, or both, among others. So Derrida essentially is trying to say that this idea of the hymen is actually works like the notion of the between, the adverb, again, eti. And it's actually operating not like a category, but rather a syncategorematic. So a syncategorem. I don't know how to say it in English, I'm sorry. Syncategorem. Who knows what that is? Obviously, I knew it. So what is that? Who would like to go for it? Either one or the other, John or Tyler?
I mean, I took the syncategorematic to be words without which the nouns and verbs in the sentence could not make a sentence. So connecting words like of, in, on, under the prepositions, conjunctions, disjunctions, and conditions.
Exactly. It's exactly that. So a word that has no purpose without its neighboring function, right? Like it has no purpose without being with something else. It has to be living with something else. And for Derrida, this word between, which is another word for blanc, which is another word for hymen, which is another word, I want to think, Parthenos, is essentially the emblem of semantic undecidability, in essence. So the word between does not have a full meaning of its own, just like Tyler said. It's a syntactic peg, not a categorem, which philosophers, but a syncategorem, which philosophers from the Middle Ages to Husserl, so Husserl, research on logic, call an incomplete meaning. Right? What is valid for hymen is valid mutatis mutandis for all the signs which, like Parthenos, supplement, have a double contradictory undecidable value, which always depends on their syntax, whether it is in some way interior, articulating and combining under the same yoke, two incompatible meanings, or whether it is exterior, depending on the code in which the word is made to work. In his criticism of the Derridian method, Habermas denounces, in particular, the mixture of disciplines that Derrida was trying to put forth. According to him, this linkage, this link, this mixture is a vector for confusion, and it amputates philosophy of its productivity, of its effectiveness, because it takes away its credibility. By falsely assimilating the two enterprises, literature and philosophy or literature and truth, truth-seeking, both are deprived of their seriousness. So Darwin's own writing, like I said, was the possibility of innovation with the encounter of the surprise. So one might say that being serious is being, in many ways, anti-philosophical. Added to this is the impressive rise, now some context, trying to swim in the world of the actual, is the impressive rise in hymenal reconstruction and vaginal rejuvenation procedures, which add a more complex layer to the meaning of hymen, or at least to the scene of hymen, to the session, to the double session of the hymen. One cannot remove oneself from the conceptual chain. The fact that hymen is also based on the idea of a monolithic sign, right? A purity, through which society would be able to judge the level of modesty or shame of the person's female sexuality. Hymenal reconstruction surgeries, hymenoplasty or hymenography, are popular today around the world, and even in countries where they are considered illegal, as is the case in many Western countries. Unlike hymenotomy, a minor medical procedure to open the imperforate hymen to facilitate menstrual blood loss, hymenography, hymenoplasty are not medical procedures, since they have no curative etiology. Because virginity, even relegated to a fictitious regime, takes for granted and for its foundation that a girl, young or old, who has not known this sort of heteronormative sexuality is located in a place and time empty of meaning and power, waiting for meaning and power, right? Always waiting. It is a blank page, right? Blank, blanc. To be conquered in and through the act of the tearing. How then to read the link of interest between disciplines, between ways of meaning making, through which hymen is being reworked, resementized in light of the Derridian method, but not only, but still thinking of the way that Derrida thinks of hymen or the hymen, itself inscribed within an archaeological and mourning of these oscillations and beats that compose an outline language of which the effects of meaning, the work of words, and the spaces and the blanks all make up the page of Parthenos today. Unlike medical discourse from the 18th century up until the 1950s, well, not really, but let's just say it is. Because I don't know, we have to find parentheses for time. Sociology, particularly French sociology, by progressive French sociology, agrees that the hymen is an obsolete notion since girls are no longer under the sway of the patriarchal regime. Thank you, sociology. Far beyond the hypothesis proposed by sociology, which recognizes in virginity the mechanisms of capitalism and patriarchy, but devalues and relativizes the significance of the latter in favor of a progressive vision of triumphant sexuality. We're elsewhere now, we're free, we're enlightened. The central idea that resists this trivialization is the link between hymen, the hymen, and medical discourse. And this is what I'm going to try to do for the rest of the talk now. So I return to this demystifying haunting. First, medical demystification. The hymen, actual hymen, is not located at the bottom of the vaginal cavity, somewhere deep inside the folds of the intravaginal canal. So it's not invisible. Unlike the stereotypical images provided to us by popular culture, or even in many ways, some medical texts that I looked at, the hymen is located at the entrance of the vagina. We can say that it is the door of the vagina, or to go back to the Hippocratic texts, the mouth, the entrance, the passage. That is the vaginal vestibule. The hymen is nothing more than a ridge or a flange, like a more or less closed mechanical part in the shape of a U. It is a mucous membrane, hairless, smooth, flexible, and thin, like the inside of our oral cavity. That is to say, our mouth, another mouth, or the part of our eyelids, the ones that touch our eyeballs, my globular eyeballs. Unlike the rest of the vagina, on the other hand, the hymen does not have any muscle tissue. And for most vaginas, it has no nerve structure or blood vessels, which is why there is not necessarily any bleeding when there's penetration. The hymen is physiologically useless. Second, medical demystification. The hymen is not unique. It is not uniform. It is not static. The diameter of the opening of the vagina starts at 2 to 3 millimeters from a very, very young age and gradually opens as the child grows. 2, the fabric has several peculiarities. It can be fragile and almost absent. It can be resilient and rubbery. 3, there are 5 forms of hymen that have been topologized. It can be a ring finger, crescent shaped, redundant shaped, narrow, in the form of a septum. A partition, in other words, that can have several openings. So just like holes everywhere. It's very fascinating. There are also cribiforms, from Latin cribrum, meaning multiple hymens in one. The most common shape is obviously the ring shape, meaning circular or ring shaped. Come on. The hymen or hymens are not static, passive, waiting to be broken. They are always changing, always moving. The girl does not acquire more knowledge when the hymen changes. She is not aware of the fact that it's changing, since the changing takes place independently of her free will. To say hymen is to say perpetual change. I don't think Derrida had read that. Medicine or the medical sciences do not know why the hymen is changing or why the hymen is there. The hymen, as Shahub Kevorkian reminds us, so medical scientist, gynecologist, is expressed by its physiological ecubosity, but it is always and systematically linked, again to talk about linkage, to the value of marriage and to sexual purity for women. And I cite, the hymen's biological function is unclear, but different unsustainable explanations have been suggested. One hypothesis is that the hymen could have functioned as a protective barrier for the vagina, or that the hymen has developed to make it possible for men to confirm the source of their offspring. The hymen also has been proposed to promote insemination. Ridiculous statements, but science. Although the hymen's biological existence is questionable, the cultural implications are beyond doubt. In many societies, an intact hymen is viewed as a source of dignity and purity, end of quotation. So what must be understood is that one does not need to have penetration for the hymen to go through a metamorphosis, for it to change from one woman to another, from one day to another. Realizing this also allows me to radically question the notion that one can have an intact hymen. If the hymen can change autonomously, can we really say that it is untouched, intact, or unaltered before penetration? And therefore, what role does hymenoplasty, but also the doctor and the patient, play in this new conceptual chain, in this other double session? Hymenoplasty is a procedure that requires a great investment of the doctor, since there are no models, as we have just seen. There is no one version that the doctor must replicate, right? There is no one immutable origin. The doctor always takes what is there to imagine what could be next. But medicine, strictly speaking, does not replace the thing, but only a version of the thing, itself already incomplete. In the case of a hymen composed of fragile tissues, it becomes impossible for the doctor to reconstruct the pieces of the puzzle, since they are not in themselves hospitable enough to be repaired. It is therefore always difficult for the doctor to suture endogenous components. In cases more favorable to the act of suturing, it involves cutting a part of the mucous membrane that is lifted from the vaginal wall with a scalpel, and that part is sutured at the entrance of the cavity. It is therefore, strictly speaking, an ersatz hymen. One less than hymen, itself already always not the one. The hymenoplasty, therefore, or hymenoplasty, thus performs the link which binds and unties the session and the text of the hymen. It is known within the medical community, and one can say within the gynaeceum, the community of women too, but this knowledge remains as an obsession, what Derrida calls a hymen, which when I read it the first time, I heard lymen, like lying to men, which I thought was really great. So let's just say lymen, of the knowledge of the husband, that is preferable that the woman undergoes surgery a few weeks before the wedding, ideally when she has her period, and because obviously there is no bleeding during the first penetration, right? So it's better that they have their period when they get married, when they get their first hymenoplasty, because they cannot ensure that there is bleeding, and bleeding is important for virginity testing. The expression which is used in English is in the case that it doesn't stick, in case it doesn't stick. As we needlessly stick a bandage on a wound when the pleasure is too gaping, or as we add adhesive tape to a sheet that we place on a bulletin board only to realize a few seconds later that it is not used for anything except to remember what we already know. Here, there is an undecidable artifice, however, from the coexistence of the modeling of constantly evolving material to a procedure whose story sinks into the heart of an unveiled and revealed secret, reinforcing the secret that the woman or women must hide. And as with translation, mutatis mutandi, this revealed secret allows the doctor to allow women, to allow men to fantasize about the possibility of the intact hymen. To alleviate family shame, women must therefore have a hymen reshaped. This reconstructed hymen, whose interior swelling, an excess hymen, is palpable, is both the mark of the suture and the resulting scar. Its place, the place of lost virginity, therefore must be considered as the place or plague of an irreplaceable original that is fantasized, constantly fantasized. It cannot erase the knowledge of sexuality, obviously. Hymenoplasty doesn't erase the knowledge of sexuality. It cannot erase history. The reconstructed hymen embodies a double young woman. The one before and the one after, thus placing her in between. Which for Derrida, obviously, as we see, characterizes the very definition of hymen, a sort of undecidable threshold. But in my opinion, what lacks in this interpretation that he's giving us is this political element. Neither present nor future, the law of the hymen for Derrida calls for a place where nothing happens, he says. Now we know that a lot has happened. For the young woman who conceals the existence of this artificial hymen from the person supposed to penetrate her for the first time, this excessive presence is also a non-place for her, however. Just as much as secret, the veil which falls on her face, where the wound to be stitched up is perhaps the place where women have to write their texts, their stories, where they make their text what French philosopher and writer Hélène Cixous called their sexts. The locus of their hymenal archive, always already in the process of evolving, of innovating, of surprising us, but not without the wound. Medical science therefore makes it possible to manufacture the equivalent not of materials already known, but of materials imagined as so many representations of the simulacrum of an origin that is not one, of a thing that has no fixed state anyway, on which we can assign a mimesis model or model of mimesis. The physician should act as if repeating an established recipe of techniques. Now, I don't have the chart here, but I'm going to read it out loud since we are also verbal beings. I'm guessing the visual is not necessary. What is the patient's issue? This is what the doctor will be thinking in their mind. What is the patient's issue? If the issue is sexual violence, then they have to automatically go to refer the patient to a psychologist. So they will technically not perform hymenoplasty. But that is also problematic, as I've shown in my first book, because the hymen is not a reliable sign for sexual assault, right? So already that is allowing us to enter into another undecidable thing. If the thing is a forthcoming marriage, and I don't think the doctors are invited as guests. If the thing is forthcoming marriage, and they have two options. Option A is for family reasons. So the family is pressuring women to show soiled linen. And the time frame for this surgery then opens up into two possibilities. The first possibility is, oh, it's coming up really, really soon, so we really have to act fast. Let's go, people. Let's get the show on the road. So short notice, and obviously the occurrence of blood is very, very important. And then if that short notice is not really a problem, but really we're working more long-term because, I don't know, they're preparing, they have, time management skills. Long-term, then occurrence of blood loss, less important because they could plan for it according to the menstrual cycle. But either way, there's hymenal reconstructive surgery. Now, if it's only the spouse that's pressuring women or the woman to show soiled linen, then the doctor is not going to be focusing on time frame, but rather desired effect, right? So family is time frame, spouse is desired effect. The one side of the desired effect is the blood-like stain, and then the other one is that the introitus must feel tight. So in both cases, the doctor is going to recommend pelvic floor exercise, so Kegels, and then also recommend that they buy a capsule of food coloring. I know, for instance, in some villages in France, even today, they'll slaughter a chicken, and they'll use the blood of the chicken to soil the linens. So with this tree-like or this arborescent organization of action plan or meaning making from the doctor must also act as if they were able to answer the following questions, well, which have no obvious answers. Which moment of the evolution of the hymen must they choose to replicate? What type of aperture to favor, and how to simulate an artificial signifier? So these are not rhetorical questions. These are real questions that they have to ask themselves. But perhaps a kind of, question that they have to bring inside their own, like they have to be in that scene themselves, right? So for the doctor, it's not a question of imitating. They still need to make sure that the women can hide that there has been a reconstruction, while communicating to the scenario of this technical medical counterfeit appearance of an intact state is precisely the moment when there is nothing intact about this state, but rather only a tactful gesture from the side of the doctor. It's not intact, it's just tact. And in fact, in France, there's a huge debate within the gynecologic community where part of the community agrees that what they're doing is just for ethical reasons, whereas the other part of the community is absolutely refusing because it's not part of their Hippocratic oath to do so. And secondly, no one is trained to reconstruct a hymen. Doctors are not trained to know how to reconstruct a hymen. They're doing it out of, I don't know, they're inventing it. So for the moment, I only want to advance one thing. Against such an order of things, a very humble postulate, either that the doctor's job does not consist, first of all, in trying to feign the original, but rather that the scene be that of just avoiding the moment the husband or the family realizes that we are all pretending, we're all cheating on the family, we're all cheating on the husband. Indeed, either this, either something else that I haven't figured out yet. So although missing in its original form, the intact hymen continues to exist, like we said, at the edge of the bed. In the double session, Derrida takes us into a lie then to fight against the phenomena which claim to guarantee a truth, which can be adequately qualified as such, that is to say, which would be invariable, impermeable to the action of time and to clear translatability. Contrary to the link between literature and philosophy that Derrida is trying to make, the medical sciences, more particularly in this case, make this work of impossible possible revelation something else. Since the doctor makes an ethical decision to protect the patient instead of having her risk her life. In the revealed hidden secret, the doctor is not at the edge of the Mallarméen literary text, but at the heart of empirical reality, which links the medical bed to the nuptial bed, involving medicine in the scene where there should only be one gaze, that of the husband or the family, that of patriarchy. It is patriarchy that must watch, scrutinize, choose, conclude, and it is patriarchy that possibly, although I'm not sure, maybe has is forcing me to think about medicine or the medical gaze outside of that simply of scrutiny. The right, that is the right to determine the effectiveness of the implementation of measures forming part of the decision-making procedure. In order to analyze the traditional interpretation of the hymen, its connection with the law of the hymen according to dicta, one should not be confined to philosophy as such. I don't even think we should be confined to literature. Thinking of virginity or Parthenos or non-virginity through the hymen as an entity to be broken only to be mended and sewn, should not cause us to shift to another form of thought that opposes this possibility. This is not what I'm trying to say. On the contrary, to oppose it would, in my opinion, only amplify the desire to repair the gesture of thought, which desires to know in order to possess. One would only legitimize ad nauseum the madness of the myth of unity. Unity in the refusal to believe in it, and unity in the affirmation of this belief. Thank you.